1961, Berlin, Germany. Tanks and soldiers are in the streets.
The nation is divided, and a wall is being built to separate people, separate families, separate friends.
What happens when a country and its capital city are cut in half? Today, Germany is a leading member of the European Union, and its capital city is a popular tourist destination. The story of a divided Berlin and the Soviet occupation of East Germany begins with the fall of Berlin and Hitler's National Socialist German Workers' Party. It happened at the end of World War II, a global war that was the deadliest conflict in human history. Dr. Rainer Seidelmann is a German author, historian, and sociologist. He lives in Berlin.
Germany became the location of a large-scale Cold War experiment. The country was divided into two parts, two very different economic and political systems developed side by side.
The victorious armies divided Germany into 4 zones. The 3 zones occupied by the United States, Great Britain, and France unified and became what was called West Germany, while the zone occupied by the Soviet Union became East Germany.
East Germany called itself the German Democratic Republic. West Germany called itself the Federal Republic of Germany, and it was a democratic parliamentary republic.
The capital city, Berlin, was inside East Germany. Berlin was also divided into East and West by a border that wound its way down streets and canals and through neighborhoods, parks, sidewalks, and fields. Wolfgang Sawatzki is a caretaker at the East German Apartment Museum.
Ich bin 1946 geboren in Berlin. Damals war es ja noch nicht Ost- und Westberlin. Und 1949 wurde dann die Stadt geteilt und da war ich automatisch Ostberliner, weil die Wohnung gerade da war in dem Bezirk.
The early days after World War II were a struggle for all Germans. So much of the country was destroyed, and the economy was a total disaster. In West Germany, almost 1/4 of all housing lay in ruins.
Damals war es ja eben nach dem Krieg zu wenig Wohnungen und alte Wohnungen und manchmal noch halb ausgebombt hatten wir auch gehabt im Haus, dass da Seitenflügel gefehlt hat.
A lot of East Germans, like entrepreneurs, managers, farmers, creative people, young professionals, moved from the Soviet-controlled East towards the freedom of the West, and they called it the freight train.
They were moving from a state-run system in the East to what they hoped would be a better life in the West. But not everyone was on the same page.
Even after the failure of Hitler's National Socialism, many West Germans weren't convinced that capitalism would be any better.
But by a narrow margin, West German voters supported Ludwig Erhard's plan for an economic system like the United States.
He hoped that this would expand the economy and lead to more wealth and prosperity for everyone.
West Berlin and the rest of West Germany was a democracy with a free market economy. East Berlin and all of East Germany was socialist and had a planned economy.
In a market economy, entrepreneurs decide what is produced, and in the end, it's the consumer's choice. On the other hand, in a planned economy, politicians and civil servants determine what is produced according to their plan.
The market economy in West Germany resulted in higher prices at first, but it also created a flood of consumer goods, which were less expensive than in the East, and shortages in the East were common. Christine and Manfred Schreiber grew up in East Germany and were married there in 1979.
Apfelsinen hier, Apfelsinen. Die gab es nur Weihnachten und dann wie viele Kinder haben Sie? 1, 2, 3. Na, dann kriegen Sie maximal 6 Apfelsinen oder 3 Bananen.
Products that were difficult to produce or imported were hard to find. When shops got bananas or oranges, people had to wait in a long line, but a lot of them had to leave empty-handed.
Ja, also das Einkaufserlebnis in der DDR war so, dass man nicht immer alles bekommen hat, was man wollte.
Als DDR-Bürger musste man immer Geld dabei haben, damit man, wenn es was gibt,
Egal was.
Dass man das dann kaufen kann.
Auch wenn man es nur als Tauschobjekt braucht.
Some things were just hard to get. If you could buy something that people wanted, you could trade it for something that you needed.
Some people think that a few master planners can determine what the people want, instead of leaving it up to millions of consumers and entrepreneurs. These lines were created by this kind of thinking.
For the next 12 years, the West German economy grew at a fast pace. Shops were filled with a wide variety of goods, housing improved, and the standard of living increased.
But not in the East. Things weren't going well. People didn't want to follow the government planners, so they had to be forced.
How were they forced? The East German government created a large state security agency called the Stasi. Dr. Hubertus Knob is a German historian.
So the Stasi was the main instrument of controlling the society in East Germany.
Man hat nun nicht das gesagt, was man dachte, sondern das, was man eben so sagen sollte.
So your friends, your colleagues at work, they worked for the Stasi.
Ja, so unterschwellig war immer da. Wenn ich auffalle, dann kann es passieren, dass ich abgeholt werde.
In my case, for example, I was living in the West. I smuggled forbidden books to the East. My best friend, he was a priest in East Germany, and I did it together with him. It came out that he was the informer, and he told everything to the Stasi.
Despite firm government control, people were still allowed to travel to West Berlin. And although it was illegal to watch Western TV, most East Germans could tune it in at home.
Du hast ja die Werbung immer gesehen, die Westwerbung jeden Abend. Und die Nachrichten und die Politik und so, das hat man ja alles live verfolgt.
They watched Democracy in Action, commercials for refrigerators that were almost impossible to buy, and a lifestyle that they would never have.
These day-to-day problems motivated more and more young, educated and talented people to move to the West. Companies were also leaving, taking managers and skilled workers with them. The brain train continued.
By 1961, more than 2.5 million people had left East Germany, including nearly 1 million workers.
It's really important to remember, almost everyone moved from the East to the West, and almost no one moved from the West to the East.
And 50% of all these refugees were under the age of 25. The East German government felt that it had to do something.
So what did they do? In August 1961, they built the wall. The East German government called it the anti-fascist wall to keep Western fascists out. But in truth, it was a wall to keep East Germans in. A wall to keep people out has soldiers with guns pointed out. But the Berlin Wall has soldiers with guns pointed in.
Und du hast auch gesehen, auch nach welcher Seite sich der Stacheldraht gerichtet hat.
And so, people could no longer move from East to West Berlin.
Fühlte man sich eingesperrt eigentlich.
Many people tried to escape from the East. One famous defector was an East German border guard who threw down his rifle and jumped across the barbed wire to safety in the West. By the 1980s, the Berlin Wall was 100 miles long and surrounded West Berlin. It was topped with watchtowers and armed guards. It was a piece of West Germany located in the middle of East Germany. 262 people died while trying to escape over the wall to freedom in West Berlin, where they could then travel by plane or rail to the rest of West Germany. Half of those killed were 18 to 25 years old. They were shot, drowned, or blown up by mines.
As times went on, socialist East Germany improved slightly, but continued to fall more and more behind capitalist West Germany. The planners made their plans, but they weren't working.
Low prices on essentials were subsidized by heavily taxing things like vacuum cleaners and refrigerators as luxury items, making them unaffordable.
So-called luxury items that East Germans could buy were not up to West German standards. Stereos, TVs, and cars were nowhere near the same quality as those that you could buy in the West. The Trabant is a perfect example. East Germany was famous for making the worst cars in the world.
The Trabant, or Trabi as it was called, had a two-cycle engine and used a mixture of oil and gas, just like an old lawnmower.
We may find them funny, but the blue smoke that came out of them was not funny at all, but caused a lot of environmental problems.
An even bigger problem was lignite coal. It's the dirtiest coal there is, but Germany has a lot of it. In 1988, East Germany's unfiltered smokestacks polluted the atmosphere with 10 times more particulate matter and 10 times more sulfur dioxide per square kilometer than West Germany.
It was very dusty, it was stinky, and it was dangerous to live there. But it was not allowed to speak about this problem. Nobody feels responsible. So if it goes out here, who cares? It's not my problem. It's owned by the state. The state is responsible.
A lot of people think that capitalism is the biggest threat to the environment. But in fact, East Germany, the country that abolished capitalism, had the highest per capita air pollution worldwide.
Die Fabriken, die haben Rauch abgelassen, manchmal auch nachts, dass man nicht sieht. Wenn man morgens aus der Haustür kam, hat es ganz komisch gerochen.
Almost half of the major rivers in East Germany became biologically dead.
Als Kinder sind wir noch durchgeschwommen. Das war so in Anfang der 60er Jahre. Und danach hat die Verschmutzung so zugenommen, da konnte man nicht mehr reingehen.
And nearly half of the residents couldn't get clean drinking water out of their faucets.
But drinking water wasn't the only problem with East German housing.
Look at this house. It looked like this. The East German government continued the so-called rent freeze that was implemented by National Socialists during Adolf Hitler's time. The result were low rents, which sounds good on the one hand, but on the other hand, there was no money for maintenance and modernization.
10% of all buildings were completely uninhabitable. 40% of all apartment buildings were classified as severely damaged, and many undamaged apartments had other problems.
Und es gab keine Badewannen, es gab überhaupt keine Sanitärkeramik, es gab sowas alles nicht.
In West Germany, almost every family had their own bathroom. Only 2% had to share a toilet with their neighbors.
But in the East, 27% had to share a toilet with other tenants that was outside their own apartment.
1986 bin ich dann nach Hellersdorf gezogen. Da hatte ich das erste Mal mit fast 40 Jahren ein eigenes Bad.
The East German government attempted to solve the problem by constructing blocks of identical apartment buildings, but they could not meet the demand.
Eine Neubauwohnung war der Ziel aller Leute. Ja, und es war ein Privileg, eine zu kriegen.
Tragically, the once beautiful villages of East Germany were falling down. At least 200 old town centers were seriously endangered. And it's hard to believe, but even to get one of these run-down apartments took years and years.
But for most people, it took even longer to get a car. East Germans had to wait from 12 to 17 years for a new car to become available.
Also das war 72, habe ich bestellt. Und 89 war der noch nicht da. Und später hätte ich ihn auch nicht mehr gewollt.
To get a car more quickly, people could buy a 15-year-old Trabi at the new car price.
Wir waren weder Stasi noch Parteimitglieder, also haben wir das nicht gekriegt und mussten auch auf dem Schwarzmarkt uns ein Auto kaufen.
This black market was illegal, but the East German government couldn't stop it. In the West, you could buy a Volkswagen, a Mercedes, or a BMW and drive it home that afternoon.
When I was young, we lived in the West, and our telephone looked just like this one. And even our telephone book looked like this, but it was much thicker. Why? Because in the West, 99% had a telephone, and in the East, it was 16%.
Ja, und dann gab es natürlich auch kein Telefon und keine Zentralheizung. Sowas gab es alles.
The East German leaders always promised to overtake the West, but it never happened. There was economic stagnation, political oppression, and widespread dissatisfaction. The socialist planned economy was failing.
Diktaturen sehr kritisch gegenüberzustehen. Ja.
Und die als solche zu erkennen.
Abschottung ist das Wesen einer Diktatur.
In 1987, President Ronald Reagan, while visiting West Germany, delivered a message to Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union's Communist Party.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
President Reagan gave East Germany moral support, but Gorbachev didn't tear down the wall.
The East Germans had finally had enough. What were called the Monday protests began here in Leipzig. It was the start of a peaceful revolution.
In October of 1989, between 70 and 100,000 people protested in the streets. Their most famous chant became, "We are the people."
Das war aber schon die Zeit, da haben wir im Fernsehen die Montagsdemonstration beobachtet und da haben wir gesagt, mein Gott, da ist ja richtig was los jetzt in Leipzig.
Im Prinzip war die Grundstimmung in der ganzen DDR gleich. Deswegen gab es auch keine Gewaltexzesse. Es war praktisch, jeder wusste, irgendwann kommt der Punkt, wo es vorbei ist.
In 1989, a government spokesman announced that East Germans could travel outside the country. That night, Germans from both sides flocked to the wall. Fearing violence, East German guards opened the barriers. At the Brandenburg Gate, people chipped away at the wall with hammers and pickaxes.
I remember exactly the night when I saw on TV that the border was opened. And I'd always dreamed about German reunification, and now this dream seemed to become true. And I called my mother, and this was the only time in my life when tears ran down my face for political reasons.
On October 3, 1990, East Germany and West Germany were reunited as one country.
Today, all that's left of the Berlin Wall is this short section that we keep as a reminder of this terrible period of German history. This is the former East Germany. And it's very hard to say where the old West Germany ends and the new East Germany begins. Once the wall was down, people were freer to make their own choices. And once companies were no longer owned by the state, but by private entrepreneurs, standards of living began to rise. It proves that increasing free market capitalist elements leads to more growth. This is not only good for entrepreneurs or rich people, but it is also good for average people.